I'm an Illinois nurse practitioner, assistant professor of nursing at St. Francis Xavier University, and a PhD candidate at Boise. But my biggest job is learning from Elder Albert how every day to put Etowaptimunk and love into action. And I bring notes because I spend so much time with him every day. I need to be reminded of how great he is because I take him for granted. And I need you to know how great he is. So bear with me. This will be a little, but it's taken me some time to put this together. And it's important, you know, just how much work he's done. And I think you've probably already noticed how generous he is with his time. He's been here. He's had his heart open and welcomed everybody and their questions and continue to do so. So Elder Dr. Albert Marshall is an internationally respected and deeply loved elder of the Mi'kmaq Nation. He and his late wife, Elder Merdina Marshall, have really made a lot of contributions to interdisciplinary research, scholarship. They've walked their talk, they're activists, teachers, and we lost her 4 years ago. They've shared their knowledge, and this is just an example of the generosity. Anything that Albert and Merdina and Dr. Cheryl Bartlett have developed is online and open access to share. Nobody owns knowledge, and it's there for you if you need it. Etowaptimunk really encourages us to join on a co-learning journey, which I feel very privileged to be on with Albert. And he is a very patient and loving teacher. He has inspired many, as you already know. I think many of you are familiar with his work. His curiosity knows no bounds. He has been speaking about protecting Mother Earth and the environment for decades. He continues to really be an advocate for the Mi'kmaq orthography and language and insists on integration and integrative Indigenous knowledge into every conversation. He thrives as a student of life. He is actually a member of my academic committee. So he sits actually on many committees and goes to many thesis defense. So he's able to actually bridge worlds in so many directions in ways most people don't understand. He has an honorary doctorate of letters from both CBU and Acadia. And he's had many, many awards, but I think there are two that he's most proud of. One he received about 1.5 years ago from the Canadian Council of Psychotherapists Association. And in the company of Murray Sinclair, Romeo Dallaire, Mary Walsh, he was named a lifetime recipient. And it's written on there for enhancing the lives of others. And of that, he is most proud. And he has most recently been acknowledged for his contribution to Indigenous health by the Canadian College of Physicians and Surgeons. And it is my pleasure to introduce you with deep respect, Elder Dr. Albert Marshall.
Well, Lynn, and well, Leo, and thank you very much. It really amazes me sometimes how rich a word can be. For example, that word "gwe" with 3 letters, K-W-E. It's so rich. It says, I am here in peace. I am here to learn. And I am here to help any way that I can of what I bring forth. And in this particular case, I would like to say that my name is Albert Marshall. I am from the Moose clan. And I am from Mi'kmaq, our territory. But I do reside in a community called Eskasona in Sheppard, Nova Scotia. I don't come from the furthest. I believe my friend Deanne comes from Labrador. That's the furthest east you can go to. And I believe within our territory, we somehow managed to maintain the integrity of how to coexist, not just with among each other, but also to coexist in this complex system called mother environment. And eventually with the people that came forward. And I believe wellness has been something that is central to most of our conversations. What wellness means and what we humans need to do to maintain it. And it's very, very simple for myself because I consider myself made up of 4 domains: physical, cognitive, emotional, and spiritual. And with that interconnection that I have, if at any point any of those domains are not in harmony, in balance with me, then I cannot feel well. I cannot feel complete because I sense and I feel there is something missing. And when we look at the current situations we're in today, in which everyone is motivated in some shape or some ways or form, whether we need a new transformative change and what would that transformative change would look like. And overall, how can we improve the current system we have? And 25 years ago, we took the time and effort to coin a concept called, we're operating on from another perspective. We coined it as 2Y seeing. It was very easy because when we look at our creation, most of our relatives have 2 eyes. And I am part and parcel of that. So I, as a Mi'kmaq man from Mi'kma'ki, I then have to see everything from my Aboriginal lens. Since I have a prerogative of having another lens, then I better use that as a prerogative to seek and to learn from other perspectives to give me a better opportunity, which is my humble and simple perspective that I may have bring forth. Because not only be able to meet the challenges that are before me, but realizing how complex the system of life is. At the same time, when I invoke my 2Y seeing, and whether I see a problem, whether I see a challenge, I first have to spend some time reflecting on how to mitigate and to restore the damage that was done. Or what more can be done to improve the situation. And after consulting with the elders last night, a modern thing like technology, I could talk to them, from Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, PEI, and New Brunswick. And they asked me a question. What would it take? And who will have to do these changes that they might agreed upon, these transformative changes? Well, after pondering it for overnight, I somehow am quite satisfied with the answer or the inclination that I have. And that is, how can we find a balance or a middle ground and what we are hoping to achieve. And the first area I believe that I feel needs to be addressed is the people that are in the front line, the caregivers themselves. How can we reassure ourselves and reassure them that they're certainly going to be working in the most healthy environment as possible? And I believe if we can come to some kind of a reasonable conclusion to that effort, once we make sure that every person that is expected to perform those duties will be privileged of a well-balanced environment. Because to fix and to cure the other problem, which is much more complex, we will need every healthy, productive, and happy caregiver. And that reminds us as well that because I, as an individual, am I allowed to expect that with these health issues that I may be facing or confronting, can I be assured that the care that I am getting will be tip-top, and this person that's given it is also in a tip-top condition? Because the issues that will have to be addressed are so complex that it will require a much more collective effort than us few can come together on. Because we do have to acknowledge that the challenges that are before us are so vast, but yet somehow are not on our regular conversations on a daily basis. I sometimes feel that some of our caregivers, as dedicated and well-trained they may be, maybe they're not really too sure of how we perceive wellness and what it will require to maintain it as such. And to us, it's very simple again, thinking about those 4 domains. And if and when those 4 domains are not in balance, then how can I feel well? And how am I now as not part of this wellness? When I reflect back to my ancestors, when I reflect on the ability that our medicine people had, and that is not gender. Medicine people, we had just as many women, just as many men that were gifted with those gifts of helping people to become well within those 4 domains. But I believe that is something that I believe needs to be much more discussed in depth when it comes to delivering services to the Aboriginal communities. And how do we come upon those? Well, we talked about research this morning, for example. How research could be the most effective way, or could be the most confusing ways, depends on who's doing the research. And we would like to suggest and to think that from our simple understanding of getting to know someone, not just who they are, or where they come from or why they are here. We believe that the fundamental principle of any relationship is through the exchange of stories. And it's through this exchange of stories that it will be obvious that we will now know who we are, where we come from, and why we are here. And that's the key point here, why we are here. Then people will know the gifts that you are bringing forth. So at any point in my life, I need certain skills or knowledge. Since I have a relationship with so many people, and I need that particular part of knowledge, I know exactly where to go and how to get it. Which would then, in conjunction with whatever other substances I may need or procedures of what I would need of constitutes wellness for me. This way here, which carries love and compassion. And if I am allowed to request and even to demand that cases, yes, I need these substances, I need these procedures. But can I somehow beg you to apply the most important ingredients in wellness, love and compassion? If anyone doubts the essence of that, we have a lot of mothers here. How many times have you heard your child crying out in pain? And after assessing that situation, you know right offhand, it does not require any substance or procedure. So what you do, you go and kiss that injured part. And as you will know, the pain is gone. And to me, I think that highlights the fact how crucial and important we allow ourselves to use something in which we are solely dependent upon, just like air and water and soil. I understand that some psychologists or psychiatrists mentioning that without love, no humans, no creature can survive. And with that, I say, Walalio, and thank you very much for allowing me to be in your circle this morning. And I will spend the rest of the day to listen and to learn. Thank you.
I'll let Deanne take this, but this is for you. This is the book that's
I have
going
to,
with you. Book.
I have to stand up because. Thank you very much.
What an honor. So we have, with those words and the depths of experience that they come from, a really compelling momentum and flow into today's themes, which is moving to action. And I'd really encourage you to carry those ideas of compassion, of care, of connection, of collective work and individual work that can allow us to, with the kind of love and depth of insight we've just heard about, progress into action. And each of us finding the ways that we can do that in a meaningful way. So an enormous thank you to Elder Marshall, to Deanne, and to all of you for the work that you are going to carry inspired by those messages. So I think now I'm handing back to Shannon with a great deal of thanks, and we're looking forward to the rest of the day. So Snachalia, a Dakalth word that means we thank you for what you do. Snachalia.
I love the fact that in a scientific forum, we can talk about deep human experience, that love and compassion are the center of our relationships, and it's our relationships that define our experience in the world. And in fact, our relationships are not only relationships with human beings, but with other species, with nature, with trees. And that's what's brought us to this conference, is to have this conversation about how we can love our planet more fully, heal our planet's wounds, work together to provide for future generations. So the Public Health Association has really embraced this issue in its Policy Advocacy Research Committee. And I'm sure you heard Heather Willette's report yesterday. We've been working on banning fossil fuel advertising, especially to youth, coping with chemical rodenticides, exploring all of the harms that can be done by misinvestment. And we're really focusing here on hopeful steps forward for positive, constructive investment. I also just want to take one moment to acknowledge our award winners from last night. We named the Dr. Richard Stanwyck Award, and we have the first inaugural recipient, Dr. Brian Emerson, here. I want to also especially say a profound thanks to Dr. Patty Daly, who has taken time from her very demanding role to be with us. And of course, Vancouver Coastal Health is the working home of our president, Juan Solizarno. And Patty's just been extraordinarily supportive of PHABC, of our advocacy voice, and of our cooperation for healthy public policy. So, Heichka. And now it's a significant privilege to introduce the honorary Dr. Irv Rootman Lecture. Many of you will know that Dr. Rootman is a groundbreaking health promoter, and one of his longtime friends and colleagues, Trevor Hancock, is going to tell you a little bit more about Irv. But I want to acknowledge from the PHABC perspective that he is a President's Award recipient. He's a past vice president. He has been the father of the Capacity Building Committee, of our Summer Institute, and this conference. And so it's absolutely appropriate. There's a lecture here named for him. And so if I may, Trevor, and we have our panelists coming up as well, yay. And we'd like that picture up, if we may. I'm just gonna go check on that, Irv.
Well, good morning, and thank you to Elder Marshall for his kind words and good words, and for exemplifying what a good ancestor is. I have another ancestor in my life that reminds me, not actually of Rootman, but Len Dool, who I always thought of as I used to think of him as sort of an elder, and then he got even older, and so he became an ancestor. But it was Len Dool, harking back to what Elder Marshall had to say, it was Len Dool who put the word love into the Ottawa Charter. Not a word you often see in WHO documents. So it made me think of that connection. But anyway, I'm actually not here to talk about Len Dool. I'm here to talk about Irv Rootman, who is another of those, well, one of my heroes for sure. And I'm not going to talk at length about Irv, but I just want to read you something. About 3 years ago, one of those odd coincidences. I actually, after the Health Officers Council meeting in Vancouver a couple of weeks ago, went and saw Irv and his wife Barb at their home in Vancouver, and had spent a lovely couple of hours with him. But I got there and he said, "Oh, look what I just printed off." And it was a letter that I had written 3 years ago in support of his nomination for an honorary doctorate at Francis Xavier University, which he actually never got, because not that he wasn't given it, but the process kind of stopped because of COVID, and so it never happened. But Doris Gillis had just sent him the 9 letters of support. I don't know why she sent it to him, but it arrived. He'd literally just finished printing it off when I got there. So obviously someone was looking after us. And I thought, well, what did I write about Irv? So I hauled the letter out, and here's a couple of the things. And I just not going to read the whole thing. But the first thing I said was, he is a warm and loving person, a good friend to many, always upbeat and positive, always full of energy and enthusiasm. He's also very modest, never hogs the limelight, always shares the credit, and is always keen to mentor young health promoters. So that's Irv. But there's a funny story goes with that. So I read that out, and I read the letter. And then I said to Irv something like, because we had awarded Irv an honorary doctorate at UVic a few years ago. And I said to him something about, so how many honorary doctorates do you have? And he said, oh, just the one, but I've got a lot of other certificates. Here, I'll go and get the folder. And he went off and came back and laid out the folder of all his certificates. And I turned to Barb and I said, what happened to modest? But that's the kind of guy he is. He's completely spontaneous and a very loving and warm guy. So it's lovely to have a lecture in his honor. And it's not really a lecture, it is a series of presentations. So let me move on and talk about what we're going to talk about. Oh, okay. Looks like we're having a problem with the connection. We'll have to hope we get the connection back and Courtney back. So our session this morning is focused on creating well-being societies. And by the way, if Courtney, for whatever reason, doesn't get back, I can fill in somewhat on that front, and we all can. So we have the theme is for creating well-being societies. So yesterday, our whole focus was on laying out some of the challenges of planetary health, of inequality and inequity and all of that. Today, we want to move on to solutions. And the Geneva Charter for Wellbeing is one of the touchstones for this session because it called for the creation of well-being societies. And so what we're going to talk about this morning is, what does that mean to be creating well-being societies? And we have 3 speakers. And the first of those speakers is Lindsay McLaren, who is a good friend and a professor of population and public health at the University of Calgary. She's also an associate at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. She's written a lot about the idea of well-being societies. She's also a senior editor on the Canadian Journal of Public Health, and she and I have, among other things, co-authored some editorials there on these sorts of issues. Our second speaker, if we get her back, is Courtney Howard, another good friend who is in technically an emergency room physician up in Yellowknife, but she's also a past president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. She's one of the leaders behind the Lancet Countdown Canada report on climate change. She's a leader nationally and indeed globally on climate change and health. She's taken a year off to do a master's in public policy at the University of Oxford. And right now she's at COP27 in Sharm el Sheikh. And she was online just now, and we're working to get her back. And our third speaker is Sage Lacerte, and Sage is carrier from the Lake Babine Nation. She serves as the founder and CEO of the SAGE Initiative, and I just want to tell you what that is: a national impact investment collective of Indigenous women focused on social purpose businesses. Very interesting, and so she will tell us a bit about that. She is also I should say, the National Youth Ambassador of the Moose Hide campaign, and you will have got in your package a moose hide tag or emblem to wear, which is about the grassroots movement to prevent violence against women and children in Canada. So she is going to talk about this both from an Indigenous and from a sort of social enterprise perspective. So just to set the scene, we're going to start with Lindsay talking primarily about a well-being society. There's a slide that if I had it, but I can show you roughly. It's a three circles, three nested circles. The inner circle is economy. The next one is society. The next one is environment. And it comes from the Worldwide Fund for Nature 2014. And what they said in connection with this is ecosystems sustain societies that create economies. It doesn't work the other way around. We make the mistake of thinking that we can make the environment in some way subservient to the economy and subservient to society. It doesn't work that way around. So we are going to proceed with Lindsay first, giving us some thoughts about a well-being society. Incidentally, I will mention to you and to our speakers, we did start somewhat late. We're going to take the full hour, so we're going to take about 15 minutes out of the half-hour break that comes after this. So you will get, and they will get their full time. So they're going to take about 10 minutes each. If Courtney can't come in, then I can fill in on some of the economy stuff, and then we'll go to Sage. Then there'll be some time for some exchange, and then obviously we'll open it to you for questions and discussion. So without further ado, Lindsay McLaren.
Good morning. Thanks so much, Trevor. And thank you so much for this opportunity to be part of this esteemed panel. Thank you. And very friendly. And the Dr. Irv Rootman honorary session. So I live and work in Alberta, specifically Treaty 7 and Métis Nation 3 territory. I'm a member and former president of the Alberta Public Health Association, and I just wanted to say that we always look to the PHABC with admiration for the great work that you do. And I'm really pleased to be able to see it firsthand in these 2 days. In fact, after yesterday, all I really want to say is that I want to move here and be part of this. So if anyone has a job for an academic researcher, I'm available. Just putting that out there. Okay, so a well-being society. So this is somewhat of a vague term. So both well-being and well-being society are a bit vague. And that's important and something that we need to work through. But I would invite all of us for now just to think about a well-being society as a society where what we do collectively is driven by the goals of well-being for everyone and the sustainability of the planet. So it's important, I think, to say out loud that this is very much not what we have now. Rather, we have a society where what we do collectively is directly or indirectly driven by the goal of private profit accumulation. And this is because of capitalism. So I just wanted to echo an important point made yesterday, which is that it would be highly remiss or in fact untenable to have this discussion without talking about capitalism. At the risk of stating the obvious, there are some important points of overlap between the notion of a well-being society understood in this way and long-standing ideas in public health, which suggests that public health communities have an important role to play in this discussion and advancing this idea. So some examples that are well known to everyone in the room, mentioned just a few minutes ago, from the Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion of 1986, which identified a holistic version of health that includes well-being, as well as social justice and a stable ecosystem as prerequisites for health. This is in addition to more recent literatures around social and ecological determinants of health, and especially how these intersect with power and money. The value, I think, of thinking about a well-being society is that it potentially offers a coherent vision that brings these threads together. And in the process, this helps us with some very prominent policy challenges, one of which is policy silos, or the "this is not my jurisdiction" problem, as well as the very helpful concept of policy incoherence, where policy or practice in one domain is completely thwarted or offset by policy in another domain. So the need for a coherent vision, I think, is very clear. An economist at Dalhousie named Lars Osberg, whom some of you may know, has done great work around the different versions of capitalism since World War II. And he talks about neoliberalism, which is a word we use a lot in public health. But he points out the difference between early neoliberalism in the 80s and 90s and what he calls zombie neoliberalism, which is the version we're in now, approximately starting with the 2008 financial crisis, which made it very, very clear that this model does not work. But we're in a zombie period because a coherent alternative paradigm has not yet emerged. Although the idea of a well-being society has some similarities to the idea of healthy public policy, where we encourage health or health equity to be on the radar of different departments or different ministries, a well-being society, I think, has the potential benefit of not having health in the name. So we know that the word health seems to automatically trigger quite narrow thinking about diseases in hospitals. It also hints that leadership should be perhaps separate from the health sector, and in fact, from all existing sectors. And so an example of this comes from Wales, which in 2015 passed legislation called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And that goes with a position called the Future Generations Commissioner, who is sort of like an auditor general. And so the legislation requires public bodies, with the guidance and support of the commissioner, to think about the long-term impacts of their decisions and to work collaboratively to prevent persistent problems such as inequality and climate change. So Trevor introduced the session by presenting an important model in which ecosystems sustain societies that create economies. And so I just want to perhaps end my comments by highlighting the last part of that we create economies, because this is really important. So a major piece of all of this is the extremely dominant thinking about the economy as though it is static and fixed, and that one has to be an expert to understand it. I think here we can draw inspiration from progressive or heterodox economists who remind us that we are the economy. The economy is simply about how we work to produce what we need as a society, how we distribute it, and who gets to decide. So it's inherently social and political. So I think that part of a well-being society is pushing back against hegemonic narratives about scarcity and debt and pursuing a democratic economics that works for the benefit of all and for the planet. So happily, an example of this exists as well. Well, probably multiple examples, but the one I'd like to highlight is the alternative budgeting tradition in Canada. So this is an important set of efforts to which public health is not well connected, but I think there's a really excellent opportunity here. This dates back to the 1990s, and if we want to be really specific, to Paul Martin as finance minister. So the alternative federal budget, which is an important initiative of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, is an important example. And I'll just end by quoting how this initiative is described. The alternative federal budget is a what if exercise. What a government could do if it were truly committed to an economic, social, and environmental agenda that reflects the values of the large majority of Canadians, as opposed to the interests of a privileged minority. It demonstrates in a concrete and compelling way that another world is really possible. So thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like we've got our technical problems fixed. So maybe we could put Courtney up on the screen. And just while that's happening, what that also made me think of is the notion that comes out of system science and that I came across many years ago from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, that every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results it gets. So if we've got a system, in this case an economy, that is delivering ecological insanity and social injustice, you need to change the system. And that's really what this session is all about. Do we have Courtney? No? Do we have her on audio? No, I take it. Okay, well, let me, I wasn't expecting to do this, but let me fill in very briefly. As it happens, by sheer good fortune, I did a report, which you might want to check out sometime, for the National Collaborating Center on Healthy Public Policy. A couple of years ago, it's published, it's on their website, it's presented as an interview, but it actually was a report on ecological economics and public health. And so I just want to touch on this issue of what is increasingly being called a well-being economy, which, as we've been saying, fits and has to fit within a well-being society. Societies create economies. We created it. It's a human construct. We can change it. There's a lot of powerful people who definitely don't want it changed, but that doesn't mean we can't change it. We can, and we must, because right now it's got us on the wrong course. So there are 2 or 3 myths that I think are important to understand if we're looking at what a different economy would look like. The first I've already touched on, which is that this economy, if you look at the way it operates and if you look at the results it gets, is clearly not working in the interests of well-being of the population as a whole. It's working in the interests of an elite, super wealthy, rich population and high-income countries. So that has to change. But buried within it, there's a bunch of assumptions. One of them is the notion of GDP. And listen to the news, and what you'll hear is, did GDP grow or is it shrinking? How much growth can we expect? And so on. But what does GDP measure? Well, it measures economic activity of all sorts. So for an audience of public health professionals, I hope you understand that a really good way to grow GDP is to promote the production and marketing and sale of tobacco. Because not only do you add billions of dollars to the economy through the activities of the tobacco industry, you also add billions of dollars to the economy for the activities of the healthcare system in treating all the tobacco-related diseases that result. All of that is captured by GDP and is not differentiated from bad ways of good ways of spending money. So GDP doesn't really care whether you spend money on doing bad things or on doing good things, healthy things or unhealthy things. I'm being waved at. Okay, so I don't know whether Courtney heard any of that. Let's see if we can get her up. And meanwhile, oh, there she is. So,
hello, how is everybody?
I hope you can hear me. And hopefully we'll be able to hear you. Can you hear me? Can you wave or something if you can hear me? Oh, good. Can you say something so we can check if we can hear you?
Hello, can you hear me?
No, we're not hearing you at the moment.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me now? Still can't hear me? Is it, you still can't hear me, eh?
So I think, Courtney, while we can see you, we can't at this point hear you.
Let me just get some.
Let's not mess around too much. Okay, well, while we're trying to get Courtney back, let me just add another couple of comments, and then I will turn it over to Sage, and perhaps we'll get Courtney back towards the end. I can't read what she's just written, but the second big issue in economic thinking, the fallacy, if you like, is growth. I touched on GDP growth. We like to think about, or economists like to think about, growth, indefinite growth, 3% growth a year, 3.5% growth a year. Those are the kind of things that turn the cranks of politicians and business people and economists and society as a whole. And we're always hearing about, did the economy grow? Did it grow enough? Could it grow more? Grow, grow, grow. People don't really understand exponential growth. But to give you a very simple example, if the economy were to grow 3.5% annually, which is not an immodest total. China's grown a lot faster than that, and other countries have in recent years. 3.5% a year, the doubling time is 20 years. So an infant born today with a life expectancy of around 80 years, the economy would grow 16-fold in their 80 years lifetime. How many people think the Earth could sustain an economy 16 times bigger than it is right now? It's crazy thinking, which is why you then hear about things such as degrowth or steady state economies or other alternative ways of constructing an economy focused around well-being. Courtney, well, we can give you one final chance maybe to see if we can hear you.
I think you should be able to hear me. Can you hear me?
No, unfortunately, we're not hearing you. Stay online, because if we can get you back in with audio later, we'd be happy to do that. But I think what I should do in the interest of moving us along is to turn to Sage and Sage, ask for your contribution.
Sweet. I'm just going to get up for a second, maybe just an invitation to stand up while I do a brief introduction. Maybe a little game of Sage Says, just a little bit of wiggle, arms up, wiggle. Just kind of get all that energy out. Sometimes I put my hands on the table and kind of push my hips back, and that can help your lower back in these conference chairs. Yeah, a little booty wiggle in there. Yeah, just taking a second if you want to stay standing for a moment, just for the sake of getting the blood moving in your legs while I offer an introduction. Hadi Sage Lacerte Sadni Tebes Nachalya Lakwangin Keo Sai Kana Lashubu Injan Yinkak Dene Keo. So good morning. My name is Sage Lacerte. My pronouns are she, her. I'm carrier from the Lake Bavian Nation and a member of the Bear Clan, and just acknowledging the territory here. And to the folks who were sharing when we came in, just hearing the language from Tlaitli Tene is really nice to hear. And also, there's someone from Antigonish, which is where my grandma's from. So just building all of those connections feels really good. Huge gratitude and thank you for welcoming me into this community today. To Shannon and to Mark and Trevor, everyone who made space for me. I really appreciate that. And so I think we talked a little bit about some of the things I want to touch on. I want to share my perspective as a carrier woman and use a few living examples of what's going on right now that's really cool in the innovation space that I think deserves a moment of our time today. So if you want to sit back down, invitation to, thanks for entertaining me for the moment. I'm definitely a wiggly person. So sometimes I need to wiggle around. I would say I would open
Hello.
just with a statement about the nature of flourishing communities from an Indigenous perspective, which really calls on a community's ability, when a community is enabled to flourish spiritually, culturally, emotionally, and intellectually, that creates an environment for innovation, that encourages bold ideas, or what folks might consider bold ideas, which are actually really ancient ideas and concepts that we've been using for a long time to move towards what we've been addressing today as well-being society. And so I think it's important to start with a few things I think that need to be said to really set some context for this conversation, which is that the Indigenous knowledges and pedagogies and perspectives that are that I find are ever present in this space must be fully integrated into the various educational curricula and policies that we're creating. And that I feel that there must be a full and equal partnership to enact these sustained and bold changes that I'm referring to. And I want to personalize this conversation for everyone, and later use a few examples about why I chose to do this. But I would invite everyone to close your eyes and to just take a deep breath through your nose. And my intention here is to ask you to call in a woman in your life, could be your partner or a community member or your mother or an auntie, someone who you greatly respect, ideally someone who brings you minimal distress in this moment. And just reflect on them, reflect on the reasons why you called on them, look upon them, set your gaze on them, and set the intention for the next 10 minutes to bring them into this space with you. And consider the matriarchs who came before them, who each birthed the next generation that has led to you, each being here. And just offering gratitude for each of those birthers, reflecting on this person's mother or their birther.
Hello.
And
Can you
their
hear me?
mother.
Hello.
And their mother, which I believe in my culture, I believe each of our shared collective first mother is Mother Earth. And there's an unbroken line of water that comes between each generation of these birthers that has led to you being here today. So just bringing your gentle gaze to the floor, and just holding space for those people in this conversation, and grounding this conversation in that sense of gratitude, deep gratitude for the life-giving nature that we have from our collective first mother. And that's how I'll refer to her from now on. She is not property. Our mother is not property. She encompasses culture, relationships, ecosystems, social systems, spirituality, and law. And to separate the Indigenous people from our intimate connection to the land or to our mother is to preempt Indigenous sovereignty, to separate that intimate connection. And so the way that I want to ground this conversation is to say that land and Indigenous rights are inextricably linked. And that Indigenous rights and title are not granted by any external source, but are a result of our continuous occupation and stewardship and relationship to that land, and the ongoing social structures and systems and legal systems that we've created from that bond with our mother. And so when we talk about the well-being of our communities, and I'll speak to the Moose Hide campaign, which was referenced. If you have your conference bag with you, there's one of these pieces of moose hide inside. And it's because my family is moose hunters, and we come from Burns Lake in BC, northern BC. And we operate seasonally on a harvesting calendar. So we come here for like Western education in those times of year. And then we go home during the harvesting seasons, during the summer and the fall. And we collect our berries and our salmon and our moose meat. But we learned that there was an ailment in our society, which I don't understand, because our people are matrilineal. We have a very deep connection to the critically important relationships that our Indigenous women and our women and gender non-binary folks and two-spirit folks hold in our communities. And there's an ailment that we understand, that there are people in our society in Canada and globally that believe that it's okay to be violent towards women or children or to our collective mother, to Mother Earth. And so this campaign is not a badge of honor or something that you should wear necessarily with pride, but it's something to signal an ailment that needs to be addressed so urgently that you would wear it on your clothes, and make sure that everyone you meet in your daily life sees it and is reminded of that ailment. And so I invite each of you to consider what this can mean to you and how it can be employed in your everyday life. But just always going back to that deep sacred connection that we have to our matriarchs and to our sacred ones, to our precious ones, and just holding space for them and honoring them. We are the land. You might hear some, even a quote from Chief Dr. Robert Joseph. He calls on the Kwakwala word Namwayat, which means we are all one. And that includes human and non-human beings, and it also includes living and non-living things. So some people think that the earth is considered a non-living thing, or pieces of the earth are considered non-living things. We are all one. You pick up food from the land, the berries, the moose meat, you put it in your body, you become the land, and eventually we do all become a part of the land. So I just wanted to share from that perspective and give you one living example of the path forward through that innovation lens, through those bold ideas, what people are doing in an Indigenous and Canadian context, but things that can be applied globally. And so one thing that was referenced was this Indigenous Women's Impact Network. We founded a national network that asks Indigenous women to gain it's not about investment literacy. Woo, okay, I need to be really clear about that. A lot of people love to think that the way to change our economy or to have poverty reduction is financial literacy. And I see a few kind of smirks. We know that financial literacy is not the answer. But what we want to do is to provide culturally informed training that discusses the trauma associated with money. The trauma associated with money. And so the purpose of this national network is to empower angel investors, whether Indigenous or not, people who have $5,000 or they're retiring and they have $20,000. They want to do something meaningful with that. And so they invest in Indigenous-owned social purpose businesses like a sustainable energy project in Canada that have a direct positive impact on Indigenous communities and ecosystems of that territory. And so when we're talking about redefining our economy, we call it a sustainable economy or reciprocal economy driven by nature-based solutions or things that refer to cleaner infrastructure, essentially. And so the SAGE network is based on the pillars of the SDGs, really: poverty eradication, economic growth, and environmental protection. And so this really came as a turning point in Canada. And I'll speak to the SDGs and some of the frameworks for just a moment. And I would say that the SDGs are really beautiful because they partially embody the holistic view of health that interrelates all spheres of life. You have to look kind of from a 360 view to understand all the spheres of life in a spiritual, physical, social, and environmental realms. And so they're relevant to Indigenous people, but none of the SDGs are specifically address Indigenous people. So what I would call on is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And in Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. So if there's something that you want to walk away with today, some homework to do, it would be to go review the UN DRIP or the calls to action, and to maybe identify within your organization some that feel relevant to you. And Indigenous peoples have contributed to the consultation, to the development of these frameworks, to building the agenda, to making sure that they're being evaluated and reviewed properly, and that they're entrenched in some of our government frameworks that are being built today. Colonialism is not a historic event. It continues to manifest in present day through these political, social, and environmental policies, and frankly, institutional racism that ignores these frameworks that have been offered and packaged with a bow to our governments globally. A really good way to a reminder of that is when the UN DRIP was released. Remember which 4 nations were the nations who were slow to enact and take on the UN DRIP, which share really similar colonial histories: Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Canada. These 4 nations initially refused to sign the UN DRIP and we're the most sluggish and are the most sluggish in our implementation. And so I would say that the coming decade is so crucial, and each of us have a role to play in ensuring that this Indigenous knowledge is deployed and transforming the nature of not just Indigenous relationship, but humankind, we as humans, Namwayat, our relationship with nature and our mother. And so the only thing that I would like to share is that there are really beautiful innovations that are occurring today. And the way that SAGE initiative was founded was that I went to the University of Victoria, and I was one of those people who applied for scholarships and awards and things, and I saved a few shillings. I had $5,000. I was like, woo! I was like 20 years old, $5,000. And I went to a bank and I said, hey, do you have any Indigenous mutual funds that I can invest in? I really don't want to invest in tobacco industry, in oil and gas, into any of our wars. Those are the areas I don't want to invest in. They said, ha ha ha, no. I was like, ugh, okay. And then I like researched and I went to the Toronto Stock Exchange. I was like, is there any Indigenous owned publicly traded companies? Ha ha ha, no. Like it was like really laughable apparently. And so I found an Indigenous owned sustainable energy project in Manitoba called Aki Energy. And so they had a community driven outcomes project where they would install geothermal heating units into on-reserve homes in Peguis First Nation. And this would reduce their cost of heating by about $1,000, $985 annually. And it would also save 1.5 million kilowatts of energy that they were using for heating. And it would also, in turn, build capacity and train the members of the Peguis First Nation to install and maintain these geothermal heating units. And so that became my first investment with my shilling. I went over and I was like, this is where I want to put this. And so that enabled this national network that now shows our deep commitment to this effective solution by generating that circular economy. And so I would say that I have a lot of hope in these innovations and that they can be used and applied globally, maybe in those other 4 nations that were a little bit sluggish alongside us. And I'm trying to say that to hold accountability and to practice a call to action. And so from this perspective, we work to showcase that it's our collective responsibility to increase these markers of community well-being and ensure that the sustainability of our planet through these bold ideas, our people know what to do, and that the local economies and local projects are one way to start. So I appreciate you inviting me to share from this from my perspective as a carrier person, and to hear some of the living examples of what is occurring in our country, and that can be applied in other nations globally. So, Masi Cho, thank you very much.
Oh, okay. So thank you for those thoughts, Sage, and for the examples, and particularly the tying in at the end of the sort of social and environmental benefit in local investment. I think that's a really key piece to all of this. We do have Courtney apparently on audio. I'm also conscious of the fact that we have about 15 minutes left. And so, Courtney, I wonder if, I don't know how much of what has been said so far you've been able to tune into, but if you've got any thoughts or comments that would add to what we've said here, or had a few minutes to make a contribution, please do that.
Thanks. And thanks for having me. It was a long day at COP and I was going to present from there, but there are no plugs. And the Wi-Fi is extremely slow. So I had to get in a taxi and race home. And luckily there was a taxi and here I am. So thank you so much, Sage, particularly for the invitation to move our bodies and remind ourselves that we are part of Mother Earth. I just came from a UN Framework Convention on Climate Change Futures Lab with Dr. Maria Nera, the head of the WHO Environment, and some incredible activists and health advocates. And that was an issue that came up multiple times, the importance of Indigenous wisdom, the importance of intergenerational justice, and a really wholehearted approach. The session was on just transitions for a healthy future, but really, as I read through the just transition framing, I realized that it all just falls into place if we talk about safe and healthy future, really focused on a well-being economy. So I have a few slides here. I can take us through them. And so I'm here in Egypt, where I normally am is as an emergency physician in Chief Dragi's territory in the Northwest Territories. And that's where I learned that climate change is the biggest health threat of the 21st century. And I, of course, went to school to become an emergency physician. And when I did that, I really thought that that's where health was generated. But of course, we know we need to reframe climate change and we need to reframe health and recognize that ecological determinants underpin all of the stability of our society and are what gives us the ability to build the social structures, the economic structures that give rise to the social and structural determinants of health, things like income, housing, et cetera, and build our healthcare systems. And I hadn't really thought ever about how this connects in with economies and how we need economies to connect in with the health of our little ones. We know that climate change is going to affect them greatly. Until I ran for the leadership of the Green Party of Canada, which many of you know that I did. I, just to be clear, have volunteered for every major political party or joined them at some point in time. And I don't consider myself a partisan human. I care 0% which political party gets the job done. I would just like us to deliver a healthy response to climate change. And it was quite illuminating to me when I did reading, when I was putting my platform together, to actually look at GDP. And so my excuse is I have not given this to a graphic designer, which I would normally do. This is me and my drawing program. But GDP, of course, is the total value of all goods and services produced in a country in a year. And unfortunately, some of those things are good and some of those things are bad. And some of those things, some things that should be counted aren't. So we don't count domestic labor. So any work that we do in the home, raising children or cooking or cleaning or caring for elders, is not included. Volunteer work is not included in GDP. So it's not counted in sort of any measure of our society. And meanwhile, bad things that are included include defense and war-related funding, remediation work, so flood cleanup after wildfire-related disasters. Apparently, we only count first purchases, so repurchases don't count. And when we look at it, really, GDP correlates with well-being in societies up to a certain point, and then it doesn't. And so on the whole, in a high-income country like ours, it only sort of loosely correlates with well-being. And of course, there are other things that correlate more directly with well-being that we also count, things like employment, et cetera. But maybe, like so many things, maybe we could sort of get away with this a little bit when we had some room to move in terms of our planetary boundaries, but we don't. We know we've trespassed many of the planetary boundaries. And so We know that what gets measured gets managed, and we need to start measuring better things. So some countries are ahead of us on this. New Zealand has a wonderful living standards framework where they count 4 types of capital: natural capital, human capital, financial and physical capital, and social capital, and look to see how that moves up and down depending on their budget. And they look at 12 domains of well-being: civic engagement, cultural identity, environment, health, housing, income and consumption, jobs and earnings, knowledge and skills, time use, safety, security, social connections, and subjective well-being. Now, Canada has actually done some pretty good work putting together some similar types of measurement, and all of it is really starting to move us towards a model that I think makes a lot of sense. So some of you have probably read about donut economics. I had the honor of meeting Kate Rayworth in Oxford a couple of weeks ago, and we had an interesting conversation about how health could help make the case for an economy based on well-being. Sage was talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and that is very much what's been taken into account in the social foundation that forms the inside circle of the donut: water, food, health, education, income and work, political voice, etc. And so the idea is to ensure that everybody in the world has access to adequate amounts of those to be able to live a healthy life, and yet we make sure that the resources we draw upon to create that don't exceed the planetary boundaries, which are around the outside. Now, former, I believe, student of Trevor's and Dan O'Neill is a real researcher in this space, and he has taken a look at multiple different countries to see how they're doing. And it probably won't surprise you to know that we're not doing super well. And we tend to be, particularly in high income countries, vastly overshooting our planetary boundaries. And as time has passed, we've overshot the planetary boundaries faster than we've met the social foundations in most cases. And so it's not really that surprising that that's happening, given how loose our attention has been to actually trying to be efficient with our use of resources as we attempt to ensure human well-being. The upshot of this paper and many other papers in the space is that in order to ensure a thriving life within planetary boundaries for the whole world, high-income countries particularly need to vastly decrease the use of resources. But when you look at the World Happiness Index and similar publications, that doesn't have to mean a bad life. You know, we've really been sort of sold this narrative that less is just less. But in many cases, the things that are shown to actually create a good life are the things that are measured here. So political voice is really important. Having somebody to count on is really important. Being able to trust your institutions is really important. When you get right down to it, a lot of them have to do with time. A lot of them have to do with us allowing ourselves the time and creating systems that allow us the time. Which involves things like good, stable jobs and paid work so that people don't have to work 3 bad jobs in order to make ends meet. It does involve making sure that food prices aren't out of reach of families. And so inflation, of course, right now is making that a challenge. But we don't talk a lot about how to maximize time. And I think that time is actually really, really key to our being able to live a really thriving life within planetary boundaries. And so when we think about what we need to optimize, a lot of it has to do with just us creating a good life for ourselves on a day-to-day basis. Now, I have to admit, I'm pretty impressed by Finance Canada. They apparently had 11 people working for the first 2 years of the pandemic on a new set of indicators, and they used some of the Canada's well-being work that I believe came out of the University of Waterloo. They looked at what had been done in New Zealand, at what had been done in Ireland, and Now they publish these in an appendix to the budget, which is kind of good, but it shows they're maybe a little bit scared to bring it to the fore. And so when the Geneva Charter for Wellbeing was published last year, and we learned that the World Health Day was going to be really around the achievement and the pursuit of a well-being based economy, Trevor really helped to lead this. We published a letter, sign-on letter addressed to the Prime Minister, calling on the Prime Minister and premiers to transition to a society focused on well-being, with a first concrete step being to actually publish those new metrics alongside the budget in the main document, and maybe even start doing it so that the GDP is published one quarter, the well-being metrics are published the next quarter, and we start to go back and forth. So we get used to looking at our achievements together as a society in a new way with new metrics. And I think that's really, really important for us to start to measure what really matters and begin to live closer to the donut. So we know that we're all having, we're all experiencing new things right now. We are experiencing floods, fires, wildfire smoke, and that signals a need for change. And we know that we can make change each ourselves, but that is not enough. But what we do also know is that when we make change ourselves, that sends signals to the people who witness it. So visual signals, and it starts to change norms for society. As a health community, and I'm very aware that, what I do in the emergency department is the sort of most expensive potential use of funds. So very much looking for a society that invests more in public health, more in the social determinants of health, more in housing, ensures a decent wage. But we do have access to the budgets associated with healthcare, which as a global community account for about 10% of global world product. So if we all together start to measure what matters, move towards an economy based on well-being, that is going to give us, because we have a lot of purchasing power and health professionals are some of the most trusted professionals in the world, which gives us a lot of political clout and purchase. We can start to change the story. We can start to change policies. We can start to change subsidies. We can start to investment and start to move and show that we ourselves are moving towards a healthy future based around a well-being society. And that can show everybody that a rapid, healthy, just low carbon transition is inevitable. And I'm hearing just a medical student asked a question around well-being societies in the WHO pavilion yesterday. She got a lot of nods. There was a young economist from Morocco who was there, who's going to start to work with one of the young medical students on carbon pricing. So the amount of discussion around well-being economies that I've witnessed just in the last 3 months, I think is a signal that so many people know that we need to change the way we're doing it and start measuring what matters and doing things differently. So as Sage was inviting us to think about how we are in our bodies and the stories we're telling ourselves, I know I spent more time than I wish I had working from a question that had something to do with, if we don't transition quickly to a sustainable way of life, humanity is doomed. And where I am now is that we are transitioning to a more sustainable and resilient way of life that will offer tremendous benefits to humanity. We've had too much black or white discussion, too much, if we don't do this, everything is for naught. That's not true. As an emergency doctor, on a good day, I may save a life, but every single day I can relieve suffering. I can stop people from throwing up. I can relieve pain. I can reduce anxiety. And I figure that if I can make somebody's Tuesday better, that is always a win, because a good Tuesday is one day in a week. It's one day in a life, and a life is made up of days. So I hope that you're all having a wonderful day there today. I hope that your bodies, your minds, your souls are being enriched by the discussion. And I look forward to any questions if we have time, and to just seeing you out in the world creating the change that I know will stem from this conversation.
Well, thank you, Courtney, and both good to see and hear from you, and thank you for hanging in with us through the technical problems, and thank you also to the technical crew for getting it sorted, and thank all of you for hanging in here too. We've been granted a few extra minutes, but actually only about 5 minutes left. Is there any one who's got an urgent burning question they're just itching to ask and wants to leap to their feet and grab whatever microphone we have back there, I hope. Okay, the microphone's at the center here. Okay, and we'll let you and Doug have a quick word each.
I think that there's something about our personal information and how it is being utilized. We talked about we are the planet, we are the economy. And in fact, more and more in the digital space, our personal information, choices, likes, ideas, is driving a huge commercial response to us. We are being studied online. And so I'm very interested from a well-being economy, well-being society perspective, how we manage this profound and significant threat to our privacy, our identity, and our choices. Thanks.
Yes, okay, go ahead, Lindsay.
Okay, not a hard question at all. Thank you. I guess I will dodge it in a sense by just bringing us back to a well-being society being an entirely different system than we have now. And so if we think of capitalism and what capitalism is fundamentally, it's a system where most of what we do as a society is for the goal of private wealth accumulation, profit accumulation. And so the digital space and how that ties in with marketing and commercialization, corporatization, that's all part of that model. So I'm not sure, I don't think I would have a satisfactory answer to that other than we need to address the underlying system that's creating what's actually the problem, right? So the digital space is not necessarily the problem, or the proliferation of that is not necessarily the problem. It's to what end is that information and the dynamics and the ideologies underlying it, to what end are those directed?
Thank you. Okay, Doug.
So I'd like to thank Sage for using the word pedagogy when talking to us, because we are children. And the answer to your question, you'll have to talk to Elder Albert Marshall, because he said the way we get to know each other is by the sharing of stories. And your question is written on my piece of paper from when he said that. But that's the answer. It's the personal sharing of stories as opposed to the profitable sharing of stories. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me turn very quickly to our panel, and Courtney, if we can pop Courtney back up on screen. Any quick closing thoughts or comments? Let me start with Lindsay, go to Sage, and then Courtney.
Great, thank you. I'll just pick up on the notion of bold ideas, or just boldness, which I think both Sage and Courtney spoke to. And coming from my perspective, which is very focused on government and economics. So hopefully that's coming across as complimentary to Sage's amazing comments. But in the neoliberal context, the role of government is really one of risk management, cleaning up messes after they happen. And it doesn't have to be that way. So government can be a very active and bold and visionary force for good. So Seth Klein, for example, has written about this in the context of World War II. So maybe we won't fixate on the war metaphor too much.
Mobilizing the next generation. And I've got something that cancelled who's at the table.
I'll try to talk over it. So I was just going to say
okay.
that.
Okay.
So there have been periods in our history when government has been mobilized as a force for good, and there have been massive investments and massive bold visions towards a particular goal. And some one in the federal government in that context of World War II in response to resistance to, oh, we're spending too much money or we're being too ambitious, said, I hope I can get this right, if we win the war, nobody will care. If we lose the war, it won't matter. And so I think that's very similar to our circumstances now with the climate crisis. If we, like, it's either it won't matter or nobody will care because we'll all be dead.
Well, there's a hopeful prospect. Sage, can you leave us with something a little more positive?
I guess closing takeaways. If you like to read, there's a really phenomenal book called Indigenomics, Taking a Seat at the Economic Table, written by Carol Ann Hilton, who is actually based here, Heshquit author. And I would just say that she refers to Western and Indigenous concepts of wealth. And in these concepts of wealth, we see the rootedness in community wealth, in our well-being of our people, in our spirituality, in our laws and systems. And so just an invitation to explore these concepts using this text, which is like my Bible in Indigenomics, to engage either through the Moose High campaign, engage Sage Initiative, and become more involved in the networks that are there, that are working tirelessly to create those pathways and roadmaps for each of you, each of your organizations, and to follow those recommendations that have been laid out for each of us by the Indigenous nations themselves. So that's all I'll share.
And Courtney, any last quick words?
I would just say
Oh,
that I've done a lot of reading around economics over the last couple of years, and it's been really useful. And I first read the Ecological Economists. I am?
Yeah,
I don't think I am.
You're good.
Yes, yeah, thanks. I didn't learn economics in medical school, and I don't know if you're taught economics in public health training, but I think we could all stand to read more economics. And I started with ecological economists, sort of deep in the primary literature, which meant that when in the last month I'm in the middle of a crash course in conventional economics as part of my program at Oxford, I had like mild panic attacks a little bit that the natural world was not being mentioned. And they were like, well, don't worry, there's a climate change week in week 7. And I'm like, all right, I mean, I'm tachycardic, but I'll try to stay with it. And I do think it's important for us to go read the conventional economics as well, because then we at least learn the words and the terms. And in fact, Sage, it's interesting when I've lived in the North for 11 years, so have been serving a majority Indigenous population for that long, and have had the incredible privilege of having a lot of wonderful interactions with people like Elder Francois Paulette and Dene scholar Nicole Redvers. And there have been moments when I've been, and less now because I've been doing it for a while, where the two-eyed seeing, when your brain is trying to understand in a new way. I know that sometimes I look at Nicole Redvers when she's talking to me and I'm like just thinking on this, really just trying to understand a totally different way of looking at things. And I find that I've been having to do the same thing as I've been trying to understand how conventional economists look at the world. And I actually think it's pretty important for us to try to understand, just like in any conversation, if you want to make progress with anybody, the more we can understand their viewpoint, their values, what they've been taught, what they hold dear, I think the more we're going to be able to have productive conversations that are going to get us to where we need to go. Because the reality is they're in charge of the economic system. And I don't know about you, but I'd really rather not collapse before we move forward. Like, I'm not a fan of collapse. I'd really rather avoid that. So how do we have the conversations coming from this place of health, of real awareness of the natural world? How do we have those conversations in a way, like with fossil fuel workers, like with fossil fuel companies, et cetera, that is more compassionate than confrontational? Because I think that that's where we're going to have the types of connections that are going to get us to a place where we can create the systems that we need. So I'm sitting there sort of like suspending disbelief, putting in my time with the supply and demand curves, and it's a particular type of labor, but I think it's going to pay off. So I just encourage people to do some reading outside of the stuff we normally do so that we can enter those rooms and speak with people in a way where we can ask the good questions and lead to new conversations.
Thank you. So a big thank you to all of our panelists. I remind you where we started. Ecosystems sustain societies that create economies. It doesn't work the other way round. We have to figure out how to turn that phrase into reality. So that's our challenge. And thank you to all our speakers. And sorry, we have run somewhat over time, but I will turn it over to Christina to tell us what we're going to do now.
So we are a little bit into our break right now. So we're going to have a slightly shortened break. And then we are going to start the oral presentations 5 minutes late. So it is 10:10 right now. Go grab some coffee, get yourselves ready, and we will start the oral presentations at 10:20. And then, so each of the oral presentations will be 5 minutes behind what your schedule is, and we will end at 12:05 for lunch. Okay. Thank you all again to all the speakers. And yeah, Shannon has a little something for you guys.